Great. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's session. At any time during this session, you have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenters. To do so, as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat option. You can either put it there or in your questions, and we would love to answer as many as possible in the limited time that's available. So as you can see, we are also recording this session. So I'm sure that we can put up the video later on. So with that, welcome to the panel discussion on the challenge of online hate. Can AI really help? Please remember, as I said before, to include your comments and questions in the chat so that we can take them up at the end of the session. Hate speech, as you know, is a growing concern online. It can inflict harm or target individuals and stir up social conflict. However, it has proven difficult to stop its spread and mitigate its harmful effects. In many cases, there is a real lack of agreement about what hate is, and at one point, it becomes illegal. Problems compounded by differences across different countries, cultures, and communities. Further, there is a little consensus on how protecting people from hate should be balanced with protecting freedom of expression. So there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of positives, there's a lot of things that we can do with the help of AI. So let's go into it with our panelists today. So without further ado, I would like to first introduce Giovanni de Gregorio. Giovanni is a postdoctoral researcher working with the program in comparative media law and policy at the Center for Sociological Legal Studies within the framework of the ERC Conflict Net project. His research focuses on content moderation and artificial intelligence, hate speech and disinformation in conflicts, digital policy in the global south. His research interest deals with constitutional law, human rights, internet law, privacy, and data protection law. He completed his PhD in constitutional law at the University of Milano Bicocca. His doctoral study has investigated the rise of European digital constitutionalism as a reaction and strategy against the predominance of digital private normativities. So with that, Gregorio, this is your stage.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's such a pleasure to to be with all of you and share these ideas and actually try to answer the title of this panel is about whether really AI can help to solve the issues around hate speech. Actually, to be honest, just to start, not to be skeptical, but actually there is not a clear answer to this question for sure. Especially because it depends a lot on the context which you want to focus on. Also because for two reasons. Also because one is for the field of human rights or even the field of law, and the other one is for the technological field. On the one hand, we know that there are different expressions of hate speech. Even the cultural understanding of free speech is not the same across the world. So the same applies for hate speech. And I'm pretty sure that Rasshi has a lot to say about the different expression of hate speech around the world. So I would not say more than that. But at the same time, also, we are aware that when we address especially hate speech online, a lot of this form of speech is moderated also by AI systems. So there is even a technological layer of complexity in defining what is hate speech, because of course, this technology contributes to defining a standard of hate speech that is not just sometimes defined by platforms with their community guidelines, but sometimes even platform cannot actually really control the problem of hate speech because of the problem of machine learning, or actually we know, actually we have noticed even with other recent whistleblowers, but even in the academic field, what are the challenges with AI and content moderation. So this is really important to say, because this is an important question, especially when we move to some areas of the world where there is actually, in a way, there are areas where there is no actually moderation of AI. And we have seen that especially in countries where there is actually languages are pretty much far from English or from other languages. And this raised a lot of questions about what AI can really do if, for example, private interests do not actually, or private companies do not really actually finance this form of, or find AI and the resources in the field of AI. So this is a huge question. This is about also what are the private incentives in this field, and also to moderate AI. So the technological level, it's very much important, even when we want to find a definition also of hate speech. And what is really, really important is also to understand the role and responsibility of platforms and also states at the same time in trying to find the best solution to tackle the problem of hate speech. Because, and this is something probably other panelists also will address, also hate speech as a problem, also producing offline harm. It's not just about something concerning, I don't know, cyberbullying online or even spread of online hate online. It's not just about something that's online, produce also offline harm. And we see so many things, you know, happening across the world now. We have seen what happened in Myanmar. We've seen what is happening in Africa, for example, in Ethiopia, even if, of course, we have not so much information about what is happening there, but we have an idea that a lot of content, for example, is published in local language, and for sure, there is no moderation. What is interesting to say, can AI solve the issues of content or of hate speech? The question is that there are areas of the world where there is no moderation at all. You know, I mean, automated moderation. You know, of course, there are human moderators, but it is really the tip of the iceberg, because as you can imagine, human moderators cannot really, you know, cover the entire amount of content flowing online every day. So AI is really important in the field of content moderation to fight hate speech. So AI is really, really important. At the same time, probably AI will improve in the next years also to understand the context, but we need more resources and investments in developing system able to recognize hate speech, especially in different languages. This is a very, very first challenge. And then, of course, we can work on understanding the context and the nuances of hate speech. So I would say this is the big context. The most important challenge is that AI definitely will help to solve hate speech, because of course, especially how it is hate speech online now. But the problem is that we need more resources. It would be really important also to understand there are areas of the world where it's actually probably there is not really moderation. Actually, this is very important. If we wanted AI probably solve the issues of hate speech, we need AI moderating content in different languages. Also for people to understand what are even their rights when, for example, content is removed, for example, and this is not the case actually. And so I would say, since of course, you know, we have so many things to say, and then we have questions. I would say that I would just say thank you so much, and of course, we'll be more than happy to continue this debate with the questions and whatever. So thank you so much.
Having been a human moderator, I know exactly what you meant in every word that you said. It does take a toll, even emotionally, physically as well, to anyone who moderates so much hate speech. So I'm sure AI will probably be the defining factor of how it can help. So with that, we move on to Rasshi. She's currently the Global Project Coordinator for Hate Base at the Sentinel Project, a repository of regionalized multilingual hate speech. Hate Base was built to assist companies, government agencies, NGOs, and research organizations to moderate online conversations and potentially use hate speech as a predictor for regional violence. As a steering committee member for the Internet Rights Principle Coalition, she advocates towards upholding human rights on the Internet and rooting Internet governance processes and systems in human rights standards. Rasshi is also the scientific committee member of Missions Public's Be the Internet Project. Rasshi, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to try and attempt to share my screen. So just bear with me. Okay, can you see my screen already?
Not as yet.
Can you see it now?
Loading. Yeah, we can now see it.
Okay, you can see and you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm from the Sentinel Project. We just to talk a little bit about what we do. We primarily work a lot on conflict zones, kind of leveraging technology to solve issues and preventing mass atrocities offline. So a lot of the work that we also do around hate speech is primarily understanding the relationship on how the online activities influence the offline world. So we work Pan-Africa, we also work in conflict zones in Asia, for example, Sri Lanka, where Safra is from, and Myanmar. Can go on. So yeah, just wanted to give a little disclaimer that it's a little difficult to understand hate speech without actually talking about it. So in the course of the discussion that all of us are having here today, although actual hate speech and profanity will be minimized, but you might expect, based on the questions and based on the discussions as we go far, might be able to see things that might not be suitable to some audience members. As Giovanni mentioned, there's a very different contextual.
Rasshi, we can only see kind of your speaker notes. We can't see your presentation.
Can you see now? Can you see them now?
Now we can see.
Now you can see them. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, we have. Can you see everything's fine now? Yeah. So as we don't really have a universally accepted definition of hate speech across the world. So, but from our purposes, and the reason why we got into automating it. So what we typically do at HateBase is we typically monitor hate speech. We monitor online conversations, public conversations across the world. So we define it as any expression regardless of offensiveness, which broadly categorizes a specific group of people based on particular attributes such as ethnicity, nationality, religion, class, and disability. And we've removed offensiveness because we realize that the social and political scenarios across the world are always changing. They change every year. So we've kind of removed that, and it also helps us from a technical standpoint of view for moderating it. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about why it's important for us to kind of get into automation. Earlier, we would say the gatekeepers of information, or maybe to perform a particular activity. So I'm going to go back to incidents of genocide, either in Rwanda or more recently with the Cambodian genocide, or we can go back way with Nazi Germany. There was a lot of institutional infrastructure that had to come together in order to be able to provide a particular amount of information. So it's the media and the government coming together. And it's a lot of resources that really required for everyone to push a certain narrative or a certain messaging. But it's a lot easier now because you could track down the source, but it's a lot easier now because anyone with a stable internet connection from anywhere across the world with a really cheap mobile phone would be able to sort of propagate any information, any propaganda without any checks and balances. So I think that's why that's a fundamental difference that we've seen in the sheer volume of online content. So also, I think Giovanni and Safra have also mentioned the human aspect of it. I think the sheer volume of hate speech that you see across the world is quite daunting. And most of the human moderators come typically from the global south. So, they're very poorly paid. And you can imagine 12 hours of very triggering content online around sexual violence or rape or assaults or genocide. It can really take a massive toll on you. And also automation is also relatively a lot cheaper, and it's also perhaps a lot more accurate as well as we go in time. But we do a combination of automation and human moderation because there is a lot of nuance, social, cultural contexts behind this. So we, as I mentioned, we do monitor public conversations, and some of the challenges around that, we also want to be sure that we don't support censorship or criminalization of hate speech. So we do believe that online communities have a legal responsibility to moderate user activity and ensure fair and respectful treatment. And we've also seen that, as there's no universally accepted definition in a lot of places. There's a lot of overlap with hate speech and misinformation, especially in the global south. A lot of entities that are in power can also use it to silence communities. So we're really looking at a greater and deeper level of understanding of how online conversations can affect the offline world. So yeah, coming to the ethical, social, and perhaps a few technical challenges, as we meant, there is a challenge of strong linguistic coverage. And I know that a lot of social media platforms are primarily in English, and of course they do have options of different languages allowed, but having a strong linguistic coverage and nuanced understanding is very hard because something that's seen as offensive in Libya might be very different from what's there in Lebanon. Or for example, the English that is primarily spoken in UK might not be seen as offensive as, for example, Canada. So I think there's a lot of nuance in those aspects. There's also different dialects. I come from India, where we have a lot of different languages that we speak, so different dialects, and also depending on who the conversation is really happening with, whether it's targeted towards a particular religious group or a particular community that has been historically targeted. And also, as you mentioned, the sheer volume of data available, and different platforms can get moderated in different ways. So, for example, Twitter is a lot easier to moderate because it's a lot more open, whereas Facebook is a lot closed. Particularly some of the aspects on how we look at monitoring hate speech online. We're looking at kind of creating informed government and non-government policies which kind of lead to more effective triage of resources to impacted populations. And this is helpful because we work a lot on conflict zones. So in some areas in Africa where there is a limited amount of information available to understand the context. And we also look at independent research and analysis. How we operate HateBase is also very transparent and open. We're also slowly going completely open source so that we can have more stakeholders coming together and actually solve this situation. And we always side with the education and counter messaging aspect in high friction environments rather than censoring speech. And we're also looking at awareness monitoring, which is both transparent and proactive. I think that's about it. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I look forward to the questions that any of you might have.
Thank you, Rasshi. Coming from the same part of the world, I definitely relate to all of the dialects that we come in. In Sri Lanka, though we have only 3 languages, it has so many variations from city to city sometimes. And I'm sure in India, it's 100 times more complicated. So with that, we bring in Ayesha, who's here from being of service to others, has usually characterized Ayesha's whole life. She's coupled with a passion for technology. She's interested in how technology can be employed to solve the world's most pressing problems. She has long championed female tech leadership, and now with AI and emerging technologies redefining what it means to be human, she is committed to highlighting perspectives from the global south and in particular MENA and South Asia. She is a data scientist in oil and energy. She holds a BSc in computer science from the University of Bahrain. She is an organizer with GDG Manama. She's also a global shaper with the Manama Hub of the Global Shapers Community, an initiative of the World Economic Forum. Ayesha, the floor is yours.
First of all, good afternoon from Bahrain, and thank you so much for having me. Hi, just wanted to say a quick hello to all my fellow panelists, Giovanni and Rasshi, and of course Safra. It's such an honor to be included in this panel. And to play a little bit of a devil's advocate, I understand that most of my co-panelists, they are actually researchers, and I'm actually a practitioner coming from as a data scientist and coming from a machine learning background. So I'm going to be looking at tackling hate speech from a very different perspective, which is the curation of data sets that feed the machine learning models that would eventually actually curate or identify hate speech. So for that purposes, let me just go into, hold on a second. Rasshi, if you can bring up the Delphi. I don't know if our audience is familiar. A couple of weeks ago, we had a big commotion on social media about this website called Delphi. What it did was it was attempting to automate or let's say have a machine learning algorithm produce judgments of an ethical nature, and it was actually a bit of a problem. I mean, let me just look into this. Hold on a second. So yeah, it's really important to remember that artificial intelligence is neither neutral nor objective. I think in the course of conversations surrounding artificial intelligence, people often forget that artificial intelligence is a product of data generated by humans, collected by humans, segregated by humans, and ultimately analyzed by humans. So artificial intelligence systems, in a sense, are a regurgitation of our very human biases. As I mentioned before, very recently, a research paper was going around on Twitter, and as it so often does, about how we could give AI responsibility to make judgments of an ethical nature. So let's leave aside the fact that giving AI the responsibility of making judgments, it's perhaps not perhaps not possible, or a working version of this perhaps could not be made. In the words of its creators, if you can see the Delphi website, in the words of its creators, they characterize Delphi as a common sense moral model with robust performance of language-based moral reasoning on complicated everyday situations, which I think, and I think most of you will agree with me, is a tall order for a mathematical model. The model, it seemed to be equating majority belief with morality. And if you're familiar with the subreddit, which is "Am I the a-hole?" I don't want to be saying the rude word, but so the thing is that was kind of those prompts on that subreddit were the data set for this machine learning algorithm. And it was actually one of the key sources of data. This is very basic, and I'm not sure how so many of us get it so wrong. We cannot really have an artificial intelligence system that understands ethics or morality. It can be coded into the algorithm itself can be coded to replicate the beliefs of one group or another, or perhaps even enforce, let's say, some government ideology. But that's not really the same thing as understanding. Sure, you can model human morality on some level, but you cannot automate judgments and then wash your hands off it. There has to be a person that is responsible for the calls an ethical algorithm makes. As a creator of an AI system, you're responsible for the work that it does. And I think that should be a core principle of artificial intelligence. Most of the problems that we see stem between most of the problems from an artificial intelligence system stem from a disconnect between the system itself and its actions and the person and the people who develop it or are responsible and really should be responsible for it, whether they be in the case of autonomous vehicle deaths or racist or sexist classifications or autonomous weapons, for example, drones. And the example that I mentioned, Delphi, it's a research paper and it's not really being used anywhere. But this project is indicative of a line of thinking that I think is very prevalent among artificial intelligence practitioners. Even though it's just a paper, it's important to remember that papers are cited, papers are quoted, other papers cite them, newspapers quote them. The data sets that are included in the paper, they get reused. So in answering the question that I may have posed at the beginning, like, can AI be a moral agent? The answer is no. AI systems copy moral language. To learn ethics, it would have to know the difference between right and wrong, and that is very different from language. And a lot of artificial intelligence systems are presented to us as a case of when and not if, as though it's too late to debate them or talk about them or to have an opinion on them. And sharing these projects, such as Delphi that I mentioned, talking about them, picking them apart, helps in organizing against change that we do not want. So how do we fix, let's say, the problem of hate speech online? In my opinion, it's almost always imperative to address the root of these problems, that is solving problems with society. So with that, I think I've reached the end of my introductory statements.
Thank you. So basically, Rasshi has just shared the link of the source that she was referring to. So if you do want to go check it out, take it off the chat. Also, while we do have questions planned out, we would love to answer any of the questions that you have here as the audience. So please do put it in the chat so that we can basically answer whatever questions that you have throughout the rest of the next 20 minutes. So with that, just to start off things, while everyone kind of thinks of which questions that's burning in their minds, let's go with the basics. How can you ensure these algorithms and these data sets are free from biases in the context of hate speech? Maybe Ayesha, you can go first, and then we can go to Giovanni and then Rasshi.
Sure. Okay, so that's actually a really great question. So thank you for that. I will give a very simple example. This happened earlier this year during the period of aggression or period of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the question was very simple. Rasshi, I think I'm not able to share my screen, but if you could bring up some very simple questions that you could input into Google and ask them, for example, what do terrorists wear? And this was actually a very...
I can share that if you want right now. Do you want me to do that?
Yes, please.
Give me a minute. I can do that. It's the second link, right? I'm just confirming before I start sharing.
Actually, there are 4 Google links that I shared with you.
Yeah, so it's the second one, right? Yeah, I think I found it. I'm going to share my screen.
While she's trying to share your screen, if you do have questions, again, please do put it in the chat, or introduce yourself if you feel like, so we can go in the room as well.
You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Ayesha, go ahead.
I think it's for myself. It's refreshing. I can't exactly. I see it now. So basically, the question was very simple that people would input into Google. What do terrorists wear? And the first the first hit basically is a keffiyeh. Now, keffiyeh is it's actually an article of clothing that's very common, not just in Palestine, in the MENA region where I'm from. So to say something at the very as the very first hit, it's actually encouraging hate speech or discrimination against people who might be using those kind of these fears. There's another Google link that I shared, and the question was, what does a terrorist wear? And if you can even share those all 4 of those links, please. We can go.
I'm gonna go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, just give me.
I just wanted to basically get the point across that as a data scientist, it's very, I really literally lost count of the number of times I hear questions like, we need to get quality data. But the thing is that what are we doing or what resources are we expending, or how are we employing our data engineers to collect quality data? Most machine learning engineers or data engineers, they are not very cognizant of the responsibility that they have in collecting data, or how what role they play in creating decision-making systems. The way in which machine learning algorithms or training sets are collected is not a very mature process. Collecting data sets in machine learning, it's a very serious task, and it takes skill. And as I mentioned, data engineers are not very cognizant of the role they play. In big tech, like for example, in Google or Facebook or Amazon, the race is to have bigger and bigger data sets with more and more parameters. But this encourages the cheapest and laziest way of collecting data sets. For example, Google, it trains on scraped data that reflects cultural biases. If you can just see, what does this question, what does a terrorist wear? The second hit is hijab. As a person who wears hijab, it's encouraging discrimination against people like myself, or people that inhabit the MENA region, or even in Europe or US, global North and global South. I mean, even though this kind of and by the way, the Google searches, they're from today. Ever since the conflict began, people have been pointing out that you are encouraging discrimination against a certain sect of people, or people who, let's say, share a certain belief, or follow a certain belief, or wear a certain article of clothing, and that's what's encourages hate speech, not just online, but also translates into violence offline. So, and this has been actually being brought up with people, but again, it's we have not really received any kind of response from them on this front. If my colleagues could elaborate from their perspectives.
Giovanni? You're on mute, by the way.
Yes, sorry, I was searching for the mic. Sorry, as usual, as always it happens. So, no, what I think is so much relevant, what you can really focus on is, of course, focus on two things: on the human part of this technology and on the technology per se. Of course, AI could be improved, and of course, in the sense that probably, also improving the capacity of AI to detect certain forms of hate speech could help also to remove some biases, because more research and more investments could help even to reduce biases. But what I would say is that the role of the humans, it's very relevant. So human moderators are very relevant. We know what are the pitfalls of relying just on human moderators, because it's really hard job. But what I would say is that humans are really important, especially if you want that these decisions are taken also by people, And at the same time, what is very relevant is also that sometimes the decisions are taken even by people. Probably the local level of human moderators is really important, especially when moderators take decision on content that are locally based, for example, that are published in their geographical area, not moderating content from the other side of the world. Because this is important, because sometimes it's a matter of expertise, it's a matter of cultural understanding of free speech. Because hate speech is not just about law or technology, it's also about society. This is also important that people that really understand what is the context could really moderate content, but this is not the case, And so it's really important. Also humans can have biases, for sure. So it's impossible to eliminate biases from AI or humans. The question is that how we can mix the two things to have a more balanced approach and reduce biases, and have humans moderating things locally. That would be really important, in terms of understanding the context or the different languages, the dialects, even the jokes, even whatever that sometimes are. For me, it could be whatever, could be just an image. For someone else, could be something that could even traumatizing, And so even if I work as a human moderator, even if I have an expertise, for example, or whatever, even online speech or whatever, I cannot really sometimes grasp or understand what is at stake in a certain content moderation activity, especially if this concerns countries like India or Japan or Latin America, who knows, So the question of human moderators at the local level could really help to reduce some biases. Even sometimes could even spread more biases, because local people could have more bias about some kind of problem, some kind of expression or online speech. But still, so it's good to have a mix of approaches between the local moderators, AI, and sometimes even moderators at the global level. That would be the right mix. The problem is that how to push, especially in this case, social media or online platform, because these are what we are talking about at the very end, to invest more and to build an infrastructure of human moderators. It's more even transparent and accountable. So because no one knows, especially where these moderators are in the world, actually, whether your content decision for certain removal has been taken in Asia rather than in Africa, rather than in the US, no one knows. So it's really important also to understand who actually taken the decision on content also, at least in my opinion. This could help to solve the issue of bias, but it's just one way to make some step further, I would say.
I think that one important point that I can mention about biases is that, thank you so much for bringing that up, Giovanni. We often think of biases as something wrong or something that needs to be fixed, but it's also important to remember that without any biases, we wouldn't learn anything from the current observations. But if we have too much bias, we're not learning anything new. And basically, biases are our way of learning our environment or making sense of where we are. But too much of it, and then we are stuck in our own, let's say, echo chamber.
Completely agreed. Rasshi, do you want to add on to the both of them?
Yeah, no, I do actually. So yeah, as humans are biased. For example, my entire team is based out of Canada. I'm in India. Some of my colleagues are in Africa. And how do we, as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of linguistic challenges in covering, and there's no real universally accepted definition of hate speech by any of the international bodies that have defined it and said that, okay, fine, this is something that actually affects human rights. And there's the term of online hate speech is still, I think, we were slowly getting there, but we haven't really been able to establish definitions. So, but from our understanding, we're really looking at how can we get more nuanced cultural and linguistic coverage. So which is why we developed something known as a citizen linguist program, where anyone across the world can come to our platform and contribute to a particular term. And of course, we've kind of categorized it in such a way. So you can input the term, and we do use a few ML techniques that can process it. But at the end of the day, all of the terms that are accepted into our system is also goes through our technical team. So yeah, we are the human moderators as well. We also allow for citations, associated terms. They could also be terms that are outside. We're currently around 98. We are in 98 languages, and we have a few thousand terms. And of course, our platform is also built in such a way that it can be used by researchers, activists, companies from across the world who want to use it for their research purposes. But we've also found that collaborating with different organizations and using data sets, and at the end of the day, you need better training data sets in different languages to be able to actually effectively capture this. And that has been a challenge because the definitions are either too broad, the context is not there. So yeah, our API is also very transparent and open. We're going entirely open source to protect the privacy. So even if you do input terms, there's no personal information. We de-anonymize all of the kind of information that is attributed to your profile, and then we input it. So yeah, I think for us, we've realized that there are locals who speak the language, who understand it better, understand the context better. There are also a lot of associated terms that usually go with hate speech but are not hate speech, which we call pilot fish along with it. So this is how we are trying to make sure that our data sets are not as biased as possible. I hope that helps.
Yes, it definitely does. So with that, we have another question, which is, how do we protect freedom of speech while still protecting from hate? How do we make sure that there's a balance there?
I was also trying to think if there are any audience questions or not. Maybe we could pause for that before we answer that question. Or we could also put that question to the audience and see if they have any answers that they want to type on the chat. Because I know that we only have 10 minutes left for the session.
Yes, we do.
Anyone at all from the audience? Safra, maybe you could type the question on chat.
Yeah, can do. Do you have any thoughts? Anyone who wants to say anything, even on chat, and then I can read it out, even if you don't want to unmute and speak?
Let's give them another minute. I do see something on the chat. Okay, she has a question. How do you manage, there's a question from Jackie who says, how do you manage the danger of malicious actors using open source tools to avoid moderation or even reverse hateful content? Understanding what model will pick up on it and then modifying the hate so that it will go under the radar. It's a very technical question, which I think Ayesha would be very equipped to answer. Ayesha, maybe you want to take that?
Can I see the question again? Sorry.
I can. I'm gonna put it on. I'm gonna put it on the chat. Thanks, Jackie. I'm gonna put it on the chat. But yeah, we'd love to hear more from you. Also, please go ahead. Question from Jackie. Yeah.
Yeah, so it goes, how do you manage the danger of malicious actors using open source tools to avoid moderation or even to reverse engineer hateful content? Are you understanding what the model will pick up on and modify the hate? Ayesha?
Okay, so there's only one open source tool that I'm aware of that I've used personally, and that's the Bot Sentinel tool. It's called botsentinel.com. It was created by somebody called Christopher Boozy, and basically what they've been doing is that and this is pertaining to Twitter accounts. So basically, when you try to input Twitter accounts, you try to determine if the person is a bot or a malicious actor, or what is the content of their Twitter feed. And I think that Oh, hold on a second, just a second.
Ayesha might come back, or maybe Ayesha's gone offline for a bit.
Giovanni, do you want to talk about it as she gets back?
I mean, it's a good question. You know, it's not always easy to answer whether this could be in a way a solution. You know, because the problem is that who actually monitor online content. You know, at the very end, this is not just a question about how content moderation or AI could help solve hate speech. It was the question about the role of, I don't know, state or even platforms monitoring what is happening online, because, you know, it's not just about tools to avoid moderation, because this is not just about AI, of course, detecting hate speech or helping to limiting the spread of hate speech, but this concern about what kind of, I don't know, technical system platform could help or could implement to avoid I don't know, circumvention measures, or I don't know, or other technology that could, in a way, you know, again, circumvent the system of content moderation. For sure, this is more a question for platforms, you know, in a way, how they want to even ensure security in their digital spaces. I would say it's not an easy question, because each platform has its own digital infrastructure, so, and digital space. So each platform could answer this question in a different way, because probably it's a matter of technology, and only platforms knows how to do that, because know how their system work. No one knows actually outside. So, but this is a very interesting question, because the problem is this is a big problem always in the field of policy, law, and technology, because always you have some rules, you have some policies, but then you have always circumventing technology that actually makes those rules pretty much meaningless. So yeah, it's definitely a good question, but probably we'll need another panel to answer that question. I'll say thank you.
Yeah, I think with this topic, it's so diverse that everything can be deep dived into so many other conversations. But hopefully we can get everyone thinking with just this 45 minutes to kind of ask themselves these questions as well. Rasshi, do you want to say anything on that as well? You're on mute, by the way.
No, I do believe that Giovanni and Ayesha have covered that, but maybe I could talk a bit about the freedom of speech aspect. I think maybe Ayesha's back; she could answer it.
Yes,
Ayesha, go ahead.
Sorry, I lost connection. I'm not really sure what happened over there. But the thing is that when we talk about big social media companies trying to, let's say, moderate hate speech or hate content, I find when we as data scientists talk about it, what we find is that there are two problems that they face. The first one is they don't have enough personnel, or they don't have enough resources to tackle the hate speech on their platforms. The second one is that this is more pertaining to, let's say, technical people. And the problem is that when you point out problems, when third parties try to point out problems to these, let's say, big social media platforms, that they have issues on their platforms, that there's hate speech rampant on their platforms, they're quite slow to act, because initially all these platforms, what they do, or at least in the case of Twitter, they put out statements like, oh, in our search, we were not able to find anything, any malicious or any nefarious activity. But when third parties are able to point out, like, no, there are significant problems with your platform, and or like technologists or engineers, they're not very quick or very eager to accept blame or accept that their systems might be performing wrong. I think that's just what I wanted to add as an engineer.
True. So that, I believe, brings us to the end of our session. We'll just ask one question. If you were to give one line of a statement for people to think about at the end of today's session, what would it be? Rasshi, what would you say?
I would perhaps say that I think from my point of view, I think it's important I think it's very, very important to understand the relationship between what's happening offline and online, and what the consequences of those are. I think we kind of come into this echo chamber of not really knowing what the effect it has on high friction environments and communities. So yeah, I would say banning speech or censoring it just for the sake of making sure that how effective is that? I think that would also be my question to big social media companies. Do we kind of get a less hateful society because of that, or are we just reinforcing the belief of these people who are coordinating and inciting violence?
I think that if I could have, the last thing that I wanted to add is having conversations with different let's say actors or people in the field of AI ethics. The common consensus, or what the idea that we reach towards the end, is that if we could make social media platforms paid for, like people would sign up for the social media platforms using their credit cards or their identity cards, like how they sign up for their let's say courses on MOOCs, like massive open online courses. Sorry, I don't know what happened over there, but yeah, like people, if they could, let's say, if there was some way for social media companies to identify people or track people who are using their platforms, I think that might significantly, let's say, lower hate speech online. Maybe I'm not sure. What do you think, Giovanni? I mean, if you wanted to add.
I mean, I think that we cannot. I think that all of us we underline different issues. So I don't know what really we can add to that. Because we touch so many different problems. I mean, technical and also legal, social. And we underline that this is a question, it's a multidimensional question. So it's a multidimensional field. So hate speech is not just about international law, it's not just about human rights, it's not just about constitutional law, it's just about technology. It's a multidimensional approach. And this, of course, the big problem is not just about talking about the problems for hate speech and AI. It's also about, again, focusing on now which are the incentives that the actors have to do better, sometimes, or to moderate content in a certain way, because this is not just about AI moderating hate speech in an abstract sense, so outside any kind of realism. At the very end, this technology are implemented by actors operating in market or even by states, sometimes for surveillance or whatever. So the question is about also focusing on how to implement the right policy or think about incentives for these actors to work more to improve the problem we underline. So we know what is the problem. Fine, that is the first point. We need to think about the incentives to improve actually, or to solve the problem we underline. So I think that this is actually what we need to focus on now, actually, after, at the end of this panel, I would say,
Safra, you're on mute.
Thank you to the three of you for joining us this afternoon, evening and morning for some of you. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm glad that we had this very fruitful conversation. I hope that everyone who's been part of this audience has learned a little bit about the humongous world of hate speech and AI and online hate. And I hope that when you do see news, fact check. That's the first thing I would leave you with. Everything you see online, fact check and don't forward. So with that, thank you so much again to our panelists, and I hope you have wonderful sessions over the next few days.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ayesha and Giovanni.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.